2021. I'd like to read a statement. This meeting is held pursuant to the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration, and the Governor's Executive Order N-2920 to allow members of the City Council or staff to participate via teleconference. As a precautionary measure to help slow the spread of COVID-19, the City Council facilities are temporarily closed to the public. The public is encouraged to view the meeting from home on the city's website at oxnard.org/city-meetings, Spectrum Channel 10, Frontier Channel 35, or YouTube at youtube.com/Oxnard News. Video recordings are typically available online immediately following the meeting. Please see the link for the Measure M pre-recorded presentation video for each agenda item below. The public may provide comments to the City Council via email at cityclerk@oxnard.org no later than 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Please identify the committee name, meeting date, and the agenda item in the email subject line. A telephone option for public comment is also available at this time. Requests to speak may be submitted no later than 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Use the form on the city's website to submit your request at oxnard.org/city-meetings, or call the city clerk's office at 805-385-7803, or email your request to cityclerk@oxnard.org. The city has filed pre-election and post-election lawsuits regarding the validity of Measure M. The judge has not yet ruled on the legal sufficiency of Measure M. I'd like to state for the record, in my personal opinion, this has denied the public a better opportunity to see how the workings of the city government works. So with that, Madam Clerk, would you take the roll call, please?
Mayor Zaragoza,
Here.
Councilmember Lopez,
Here.
Chair Perrello.
Here.
The
And-
agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, March 16th. Thank you.
And Mr. Aramides, could you lead us in the flag salute? And in that, at that time, can we take a moment of silence? We've had another incident of gun violence. We've had members of specific ethnic groups have been targeted. It's a very dark day. It's a black eye for this nation that this type of stuff happens in this country. And then when we're done, we'll have an explanation of the minutes being pulled. So the reason I'm announcing that is if someone wanted to address the minutes and they're pulled after public comments on the agenda, not on the agenda, you would have lost your time. So if somebody's got something to say, there's an opportunity to public comments on items not on the agenda. By giving you notice, the minutes will be pulled. There'll be an explanation. Mr. Aramides, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. Aramides, I apologize. Aramides.
Adamitis.
Adamitis. Thank you.
Ready, begin. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag.
to the flag of the United States of America,
To the
Republic.
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. My understanding is that the minutes will be pulled, and I'd like the city attorney to explain the rationale for that.
Thank you, Chair Perrello. It came to our attention that the minutes that were provided in the agenda pack contained an error on the item with respect to a contract being recommended to be awarded to Waste Management. That item was in fact continued, and the vote was 3-0 to continue that item to a future date, which has not yet been heard. The minutes reflected staff's recommendation. So the implication was that we had in fact approved sending that to council, which has not happened yet. We don't know exactly what date that's planned to come back to this committee, but we anticipate it will come back, both the corrected minutes and the future action at a future date.
Thank you very much, Mr. Early. Madam Clerk, do we have any comments for items not on the agenda?
Yes, we have one by Mr. Stein.
Okay.
Mr. Stein, Lauren Stein, You have 3 minutes to speak.
Good evening, members of council or committee. I'd like to have an item placed on the agenda for better communications and understanding, particularly as it pertains to the difference between hump credits and water allocations. Hump credits are those credits granted or provided for taking agricultural land out of production. Since 1980, thousands of acres have been taken out of production and we're supposed to be given water or hump credits for being able to pump water, or pump credits for taking water out of the agriculture industry and supposedly used for allocations for residential property or commercial property. Strawberries, for example, consume a large amounts of water, and taking it out of production means there's more water available for the community at large. Likewise, citrus crops, primarily lemons, have been water neutral. The amount of water lemons need to grow is about equal to the water that's available to grow lemons. When this land is taken out of production, allocations are supposed to be given to the city in form of being able to pump out water at some time in the future. In the last 5 years, there's not been enough water back in those credits. In fact, you probably go back 25 to 30 years, there's been an over allocation of credits by Fox Canyon. This is an item of concern because land is still being taken out of production, and the city is not getting allocations that's been promised in the previous agreements. And it's in litigation right now. So I'd like to have an explanation made to the public so the public understands what's going on. The side note to this is also the GRAPE program. As you're aware, there's been discussions that with the great water coming out of production for the farmers, that's supposed to be hump credits available. The issue here is the hump credits have been considered as a future potential item. It's my understanding of the GRAPE program, future benefits are not included in part of the GRAPE program. Now, with my discussion I had earlier this evening or this afternoon, there's about $7,000 in debt service fees paid by 40,000 people who are paying for the debt service for the GRAPE program and the GRAPE program alone, but not getting the benefit of this. To this, I believe there's a misunderstanding or miscommunication because I believe Prop 218 is being violated because we're paying for debt service on the AWTF that's supposed to make water credits available. We're not getting those water credits. Therefore, we're paying for something that we're not receiving a direct benefit from or immediate benefit at this time. So I'd like to have a clarification with an open discussion on the allocation of water and hump credits and water credits. And that really needs to be discussed because we've had discussions in the past where I'm allowed to make a comment, then afterwards other comments are made, and then I'm not allowed to refute those comments. So again, I'd like to have this item.
Thank you for sharing your views, Mr. Stein. As has been noted, the next item would be the approval of the minutes, and that item has been pulled for corrections at a later date. The next item on the council, I understand there are no other public comments on items not on the agenda. Am I correct, Madam Clerk?
That is correct, Chair Perillo.
Thank you. The next item is a report number 1, D1, Public Works Department, Senate Bill 1, Local Streets and Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Account, RMRA, Funding and Project List for fiscal year 2021-2022. The recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution 2. It's a two-parter. Number 1, adopt the fiscal year 21-22 project list for Senate Bill 1, proposed projects that will be funded in part or solely from road maintenance and rehabilitation account revenues. And number 2, authorize the city manager to take whatever actions are necessary and appropriate to carry out the purpose and intent of the resolution. This item, there was a visual presentation, but it was available due to the voters' approval of Measure M, and it cannot be shown at the meeting, which I think is a big mistake on the voters' part. It's personal opinion. And the presentation, I believe, will be Ms. Aronat, the city engineer. Do any council members have any specific questions? And I know that we do have one public speaker, Ms. Brown. do we have any specific questions on any clarifications before we hear the speaker? And we can get deliberation after we hear the speaker. Mayor, do you have any specific questions?
Not now, after the speaker.
Councilmember Lopez?
No, I can wait. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brown, if you're ready, we're,
Chair Perrello, Ms. Brown is not available at this time.
okay. Okay, if she does come before this item ends, we'll entertain her there. Are there any discussions with respect to this item? Committee
Mr.
members?
Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Mayor.
look, I asked Tatiana, was there any reduction in funding because of the less driving from COVID?
Mayor Zaragoza, yes, generally speaking, agencies throughout the state of California received less funding than we would have should the pandemic not had happened. And that is due to just less cars being on the road, generally speaking, with people working from home and whatnot.
Mhm. And the other question I have is, we have some carryover from the last time. I think it was 44,102,000 rounded to almost 4.9 for a total of 9 million. So we can carry over monies if we did not use it for that maintenance for the current year. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. Yes, that funding can roll over year after year.
Oh, so it's just not 1 year, it's several years if we don't use it.
So yes, it's several years up to and when we actually use that funding.
Okay, and also we have, what is it? You said it was 448 miles or 383 miles of streets that we take care of. And total mileage, I think, was 448 miles that we take care of. And that SB1 money is only for maintenance, and that's it. Is that correct?
So that's for maintenance of our streets. That does not include our alleyways. So any sort of resurfacing or repair treatments on our roadways can be used, or this funding can be used for those purposes.
And the last question I have, Mr. Chair, is that one of the things that we talked about was cracks, in where we take measurements of the PCI for our streets. Has to do a lot with cracks in the pavements and so forth. So are we kind of lucky because it didn't rain to a degree that maybe the cracks are not as much as they normally would have been?
Yes, Mayor. So rain does affect the rate at which pavement has a tendency to fail, right? Especially if there's already cracks there. So as water intrudes in there, they become larger, especially with traffic over them as the water is intruded into the asphalt. But to your point, yes, I guess that is one benefit to the lack of rain here in the area right now.
So we lose water on one side and then we end up probably saving some PCI on the other side then.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Lopez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Arnaud, for the presentation. So just to clarify, these $9 million are coming from the SB1 funds, but this isn't the only source of funding that we will have this year to maintain roads, or can you elaborate on that?
So as of right now, the only thing that is absolutely known for sure is that this SB1 funding is available, and then it'll be up to council members to decide whether if any general fund monies or other sources of funding can be, well, actually only general fund can be used for these purposes. So, and that'll come at the budget, through the budget cycle, and you'll have the CIP coming before you, which will give you an idea of, the choices that you'll have to make.
Thank you. And so considering the 383 miles of streets, and it was the 70 miles of alleyways, 61 parking lots that the city is responsible for maintaining. In the ideal world, if we had, an endless amount of money to maintain the roads, as you mentioned in your presentation and the report, being able to maintain the roads and these streets and parking lots would reduce the further and greater expense of having to completely redo them, right? So what, in the ideal world, how much would it cost to maintain these roads on a yearly basis if we had the funding?
Great question. So that actually, with today's dollars, is about $14 million a year to maintain PCI for the city of Oxnard with the lane miles we have to maintain.
And that would mean, but where the PCI levels are right now, we would have to actually spend a lot more to even get to a good level to maintain those $14 million cost. Is that correct?
That's correct. So just for reference, right, to throw numbers out at you, it would cost about $25 million a year right now for the next 4 years to be able to get up to a PCI of 70, which is the state recommended average PCI. And from that point forward, once we achieve that, then yes, it would drop down to, and in 4 years, we'd be looking probably something, we're in the $15.5 to $16 million range to maintain those, assuming for inflation and whatnot. So but that's a good point. We have to get up to that PCI that we'd like to maintain before we can actually get to that equilibrium.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that information, and I think it's just very relevant for our public to understand. There is work being done to make improvements in our roadways, in our streets, our alleyways, but certainly we have a long way to go, and appreciate all the work that our staff is doing to get us there. Thank you.
Chair Perrello,
Yes.
Miss Pat Brown is on the line.
Okay, let's open it up, Pat. Thank you for calling in, Pat. Thank you for calling in, Miss Brown. Miss Brown.
Miss Brown? Hi, Miss Brown. You have 3 minutes to speak.
I have a serious problem on, you guys have done, by the way, what they have done in the last few weeks on Rice and Rose and 5th Street on the east side of town. What they have done is miraculous. I mean, I have lived here since 1993, and I think that the jobs that they've been doing recently, I don't know if you've got different people doing it or whatever, but it is absolutely fantastic in comparison to what it's been for such a long time. It's just a gift. It's a gift that you've given everybody involved in organizing, arranging it, doing the work on it. Is just a gift that you've given to the residents. I swear it's unbelievable. I wake up every time I think about it, I think, oh my God, how did this happen? It's so wonderful. I have one little problem, and that is at 9th Street and Oxnard Boulevard, just north of the 5 Points intersection, 1 block. On the other side of 9th, on the other side of Oxnard Boulevard, is Driffle. Driffle has the mobile home park going in there, as well as an apartment complex. It's heavily traveled in that intersection throughout the day and evening, every day. There is a problem when it rains, and that's why I am so glad that it hasn't rained recently, even though we need the rain and my plants need the rain. The problem is when it rains, the Oxnard Boulevard itself is humped up in the middle of it to the point where all the water from the street at that area flows into the rain gutter that we have to drive through a deep what should we say, almost like a river, to get up and on through Driffle Boulevard to get to our homes. And coming out, we have to dip down into that deep well in order to get up and onto Oxnard Boulevard. This is, I've been told years ago, this is because we have to back up the water from the rain so it doesn't go to the 5 Points intersection. So it all comes and floods our entrance to Driffle from Oxnard Boulevard. Why we have to do this, I do not know. Nobody can walk across the street there. across Driffle Boulevard at that intersection. Nobody can walk there. I mean, even if
Your
you're
time is
riding a bicycle, your foot as a
Thank you for sharing your views, Ms. Brown. And I'm requesting somebody from Public Works contact Ms. Brown so that you can, so if we're not aware of exactly what she's talking about, she can have the feeling of at least making sure she got her message to the horse's mouth, shall we say. And I appreciate that, staff. And I will also please to the staff, carry back the high praise that Ms. Brown has given staff for the work that they've recently done. I have a couple of questions on this item. When we're mentioning that the funds are available for any pavement that is 79, rated 79 or below, and currently the city of Oxnard is rated at 63, the pavement index. And it was mentioned to get up to 70, we would have to, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been wrong before. It was mentioned, I believe, by our engineer, very skilled young woman, $25 million a year for 4 years, but that's $100 million to get us to 70. And where I'm going with this, ladies and gentlemen of the public, Measure N requests that we get up to 80. Do we have any idea how much it would take to get to 80?
Yes, Councilmember Perillo, that's closer to $35+ million a year right now. For the next, that actually is figuring the next 6 years.
Ladies and gentlemen of the public, I hope you realize what you voted for. Those are my questions on the number, Ms. Erna. Thank you very much. And one last question. It is identified that Teal Club Road will be part of a repaving. Is Teal Club Road in the city of Oxnard? And if it is, does it go all the way down to Victoria? It's in the city of Oxnard? Because at one time I had assumed or led to believe, and as I've mentioned, I've made mistakes from the past. This was a county road, that it was not in the city, that both sides are in the county. Can you clarify or straighten me out, please?
Yes, sir. So the majority of Teal Club Road is within the city up to the edge of pavement on the north end, essentially. So the ditch is in the county while the roadway itself, as of this time, is in the city's possession.
If the roadway up to the pavement edge on the ditch on the north side is in the city of Oxnard, are the homes on the south side of the street, is that in the city?
Yes, so the few homes that are on the other side of the road, those are within city boundaries. There's one exception where the county does, there's like a jog in the county city line that does actually go over some of the homes there, but the majority of Teal Club Road from Ventura to Victoria is within the city's boundaries. It's also worth noting that the funds can only be used on roadway segments that have been identified by resolutions of council, and Teal Club Road would be one of those roads, at least the portions that are within the city.
Thank you very much for the clarification and admitting I'm human. For the representative of District 1, you taught me something here tonight. Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions by committee?
I'd like to make a motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, motion by Zaragoza,
Second.
second by Lopez. Roll call, Madam Clerk, please.
It's item 1 and 2. Mhm.
Mayor Zaragoza,
Yes.
Councilmember Lopez,
Yes.
Chair Perillo.
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
and staff, please get the message back from the public speaker, how appreciative she is. And I would like to thank Debbie O'Leary, the transportation planner, for preparing this report. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is Public Works Department. The subject, railroad quiet zone establishment. The recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee recommend that the City Council receive and file a report on the Federal Railroad Administration Railroad Quiet Zone process and potential application within the city of Oxnard. There was a presentation available on the internet, but because of the voters' wisdom, I question, the item is not available for presentation tonight. You needed to look at it previously. It indicates here a contact of Craig Beck. I'm not sure who's going to make the presentation. The PowerPoint was Mr. Bokum, a very informative PowerPoint. Do we have any questions? And we do have some speakers on this. Do we have any basic questions by the committee before we get to the speakers? Mayor?
Wait for the speakers.
Madam Lopez, okay. Okay, the first speaker is Ms. Brown.
Miss Pat Brown, you may unmute by pressing *6. Miss Brown?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, Ms.
ma'am.
Brown, we can hear you.
We have a problem with the railroad that's here local as they come through the 5 Points intersection. They go way overboard. I know that they're required to, but they go way overboard in their honking and honking and honking. The traffic signals take care of it. They don't have to do that much honking. They just go on and on and on. And the people who live in the new housing directly south of the railroad tracks in the old drive-in theater that's just east of Oxnard Boulevard and South Oxnard Boulevard, they have to put up with this, and they're what, 6 or 8 feet away. It is just horrendous. I live about half a block north of Woolley Road in the Royal Palms Mobile Home Park, and I was after I moved in 1993, it just got to the point where that honking and honking was just driving me nuts. When I got a new roof on my mobile home, it's really a manufactured home with a peaked roof, regular shingles and whatnot. When I had that redone, I just had them cram as much insulation in that roof as they under the roof in the framework as they could possibly cram in. Just cram as much insulation as they could get in. And so I don't hear it anymore unless I open a window. But I know the people west of me, say south of 9th Street, between 9th and Willie Road, are just, and to the west, are just as fit to be tied with all of that clanging and squealing and noise and whatnot and honking of that train. And it gets to them. They've told me when I asked at a meeting, they told me that they can't even talk on their phones when that's honking because they can't hear the person on the other end. So they have to hang up the phone if the train's coming through, either way, back or forth, either east or west, whichever way. They still have to hang up their phones and continue with their business after the train is gone. And it takes forever. It's very, very slow moving and stopping and whatnot. And a lot of times it'll stop right in the middle of the intersection and just sit there. And it just drives everybody up the wall that lives anywhere near it. I'm telling you, I am lucky because I had all that insulation crammed into my roof. But other people don't have that option. They got
Thank you very much for sharing, Ms. Brown. Any questions of staff?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mayor. Go ahead.
I just want to share that there was really a comprehensive report. You know, it's a tremendous amount of work that was done, and going through the whole report, I think ultimately, you know, staff says that we probably need a consultant if we want to continue with looking at this item. The concern that I have, or we're looking at, is the potential liability. For example, over in the crossing over on Woolley Road and East Street, you know, that one section there has no guards of any kind. There's no guards. There's basically not even a pedestrian crossing, signals or anything. So that's a big concern to me. And then over the one over on Gary Street, there's a pedestrian crossing that is not taken care of, and some other streets, that are potentially could be really a major liability for us. And I know, for example, the Wanimi Railroad. That's my understanding, according to staff, that in order to, well, there's no funding to start off with. I think the funding apparently has to come from the local entities. So, and for example, the railroad coming from Wanimi, potentially the city of Wanimi, the port in Oxnard would have to fund those crossings. But anyway, I know I'm rambling all over the area here, but I just see a lot of concerns here on the for liability issues type wise, But it was quite a report. It just, I mean, I read it all, but it just absolutely an excellent report, and it's going to take a lot of funding. And my understanding is that that potentially we're going to have to look at the quiet zones and come out with some supplementary safety measures, and look at the Oxnard Public Railroad crossing maps and so forth and so forth. My apologies for rambling, but I just want to share with you that it's quite a report, but there's a lot of locations that I believe, especially Woolley Road and East Street, would be really something that we potentially could put some gates or something to. We're just lucky nobody's got run over, or a car or a pedestrian there in that intersection. But forgive me for rambling all over the place here, but it's quite a report.
Mr. Chair, I know that at this stage, we're still at the 30,000 foot level, but I'd like to ask our traffic engineer, Mr. Bokum, to just respond to the mayor's
Yes.
various concerns, even though we're not at the detailed level yet.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, thank you, Alex and Chairman Perello, Mayor Zaragoza, and Member Lopez. I am Tim Bokum, the city's traffic engineer. And the report, Alex, the city manager, is correct. This is a very high-level report that was written for your consumption and consideration, basically outlining a lot of the background issues that we would need to tackle if, in fact, we were to move forward with quiet zone establishments within the city. Risk association and liability is just one of the many things that we would need to look at. And those issues would depend very much on the location that we might look at for a pilot program, and what we would potentially determine as our best action of improvements that would allow us to meet the quiet zone standards to meet the federal requirements. And so there are certain crossings that are very urban in the city, and many of those are associated with the Union Pacific Railroad line that run parallel to Oxnard Boulevard and 5th Street. And so many of those crossings have significant signaling systems that are there, but they are also an railroad operation that is very high speed. We've had a number of collisions along them. We have a lot of pedestrian trespass issues. And so we would need to analyze all those issues and sort of package them together to bring back for council consideration of what it would cost in order to establish a quiet zone along any of those areas. Ms. Brown did mention one of the more complicated locations within the entire city, and I'm not sure that's a surprise to anyone. The 5 Points intersection in Woolley Road as it comes into the downtown from the port and then access to the downtown area is highly complex. And whether it's years of housing starting to encroach into the areas where we have industrial and railroad operations, or volumes of trains that may change, or the speed of trains throughout that area, those are all things that the quiet zone process have been sort of established to try and address. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to be easy or simple, or that your liabilities may go away. But regardless of where we would look to do a quiet zone, we would really have to investigate those needs to bring back that information for the council to get a really good idea of the costs, the potential liability, the operating costs that may come along with it if in fact we incur some additional operating costs. So those would be things that we would hire a consultant in to help us prepare that to bring back for council consideration at a later time.
Mr. Chair, looking at, I know I mentioned Willie Road and East Street, but how often does a train go by there? Because many times I don't see a train go by, but does it go maybe once a week or twice a week or so? Maybe when a train comes by, we might have somebody taking care of that intersection while the train goes by. You know, maybe somebody from the traffic control or something, but I don't know how many times a train goes by. There's maybe a minimal amount, you know, that might not be as hazardous or as much liability as I'm thinking it is, you know, so.
Yeah, the most recent data that I could pull, it averages about 2 trains a day, but it can be much less
Much
than
less,
that. Of course, on that route, one of the good things is the train goes real slow, so the likelihood of a
Yes.
really serious collision is lessened. But the bad news is the train is going slow, so that horn has to be sounded all the way through the intersection. And that's what Ms. Brown is describing, is that there's a number of horns that if it was coming through at a faster pace would be a lot less.
Because I know,
yeah.
I know that Willie Road and Ventura Road has the gates, you know, and that works pretty good. You know, it's a lot safer there. Anyway, thank you for that. But
Yes, sir.
again, you know, whoever put that report together, I commend them. It was quite a report, you know, and lots of work and lots of good examples too. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I could add just one more comment before you move on. When it comes to establishing railroad quiet zones, there's only one approach, which is a go extremely slow. There is no going fast with this when you're working with the railroads, which, as we all know, is still sacred under federal law. I've worked on these before. They all take time, but it's, from all that we've heard from various council members and the community, I think this is a good start just to have a basic understanding.
That's right.
And as we progress, if we pursue any particular crossing, regardless of which one, it's going to take years. I just want to add that comment. Thank you.
Councilmember Lopez, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bolcom. I agree this presentation was very thorough, very informative. And so I just want to kind of take it back to just a very basic question. And to clarify, we currently do not have any quiet zones. Is that where this is starting from? Okay, I see you nodding your.
That is correct. We do not have any existing quiet zones, I believe. In the county, there aren't any, but definitely not within the city or near the port.
Thank you. And certainly, as Ms. Brown mentioned, in terms of, I think the issues with the loud notifications, the horns being used, I've certainly heard of these concerns, not only in regards to the Five Points area, but also the residential area with the Ventura County Railroad that goes along the Blackstock neighborhood, Cal Gisler, especially close to that Channel Islands Boulevard crossing. So I do understand that. I think this would be a very, interest in a lot of our residents to see this work go through, and especially when it comes to the safety of our residents, because as you mentioned, we have seen and heard of collisions happening in different intersections, and certainly the safety of our residents is first and foremost. So I appreciate this and look forward to this process as slow as it can be. But thank you.
Mayor, it appears the staff this report's put together by Ms. Aronout and the speaker, Mr. Bolcom. So good work. It's a tremendous report.
Yeah, it was a team effort that really, this is a very complex issue, so it took a lot of hands to sort of boil it down to get it in a digestible format for you.
But if I've overlooked somebody, please share our compliments for the work done. I don't want to be a wet blanket on this, but the mayor had served on the airport authority with myself, and now currently it's Councilmember Lopez on the airport authority. There are people that will complain about the sound of airplanes, and there were people that complain about the sounds of trains and the sounds of trucks. But I find it hard to believe that someone could move into an area and not realize there was a train track there. And doesn't compensate for the horns blowing, and sometimes it does seem like the guy tooting the horn, he gets a little bored, so he hits the horn a little more. I don't know, but we need to realize that this is a big deal. And I would also like to point out, because in my neighborhood, the South Bank neighborhood, there have been several fatalities with the trains, but they have, for the most part, have always been identified as people killing themselves. They step in front of a train. Health, safety, and welfare of the residents is the highest priority of any elected official or any employee of the city of Oxnard. So I appreciate this report. I appreciate the reality. This is going to be a very expensive and time-consuming proposition if it is ever tackled. And I believe it is being addressed, and that's what the public has asked. I do recall the first time that I heard these concerns was from a couple that had moved from the Bay Area to Oxnard, and they were complaining that the horns blew the whistles early in the morning. And I did have a conversation with I guess the wife in this matter. And I explained that there was stuff coming out of the Navy base. There was stuff coming out of the harbor. There were stuff coming out of the plants. There's a lot of industry involved with this train. It's not just, joyride type stuff. And it's a working city. They wanted changes overnight. And I give them credit. They've stayed involved. They're heavily involved. But my comments, I appreciate this report. The Public Works is going to make a recommendation, City Council receive and file. So do we have a recommendation on this matter?
So do we need a motion for that? So move.
Second.
Motion by Zaragoza, second by Lopez. Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Lopez.
Yeah.
Mayor Zaragoza.
Yes.
Chair Perillo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
Clever, that was clever. Mr. Boca, thank you very much, and Ms. Aronat, and all those involved in the presentation, including the guy that honked the horn. We're going to get a call here on it.
Thank you so much.
You're okay. The next item is the master license agreement for wireless installation on municipal facilities. The recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee, two-parter again, receive a summary report on the draft master license agreement for wireless installations on municipal facilities, and part two, provide input on the draft master license agreement for wireless installation on municipal facilities. Again, this was an item, because of Measure M, was pre-recorded, so there will be no presentation. It is available on the internet, but I do not believe that it serves the public to the best interest, but we're following the rules of the road. I see we have Mr. Scott Clowitz here, and this staff report was put together, indicated Isidore Figueroa apparently prepared this report. The presentation I found to be thorough. We have public comments. We have 3 public comments: Rojas, Kingpa, and Brown. Are there any specific questions on the technical matters of this by the committee members before we hear the public? And the only reason I ask that, sometimes a clarification of a question you may have in your mind will help the members of the public that are going to ask a question.
Mr. Chair, could I ask if we could have Mr. Kolwitz make some introductory remarks?
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager.
Thank you, Chair Perillo, as well as members of the committee. Thank you for having us tonight to discuss this item. I wanted to help frame what we're talking about tonight, in addition to the video that was out there. So some quick background as far as the intent and the stakeholders on this. Since 2019, the city has been seeking input from the wireless carriers, specifically AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon, on drafting this master license agreement in order to establish various procedures for the issuance of a license for carriers to use city municipal facilities. And essentially, the purpose of this is to have a single form for all carriers. So there's one set of rules, and to reduce the administrative burden on city staff. City staff did receive a number of comments from our carriers, And we reviewed those and incorporated select revisions, which we felt could be applied generally and fairly to all of the providers. One of the reasons why I wanted to chime in, though, is as we went through that process, we thought it was wise late in the process to add design standards to the MLA. And the intent of the design standards that we're trying to add would be to minimize aesthetic impacts of these various small cell facilities without effectively prohibiting the provision of wireless facilities. Subsequent to drafting, to finalizing the draft of the master license agreement that we received the comments on from our various carrier partners, city staff continued surveying cities comparable to Oxnard, specifically Fremont and Salinas came to kind of the top of the list. And we noticed that those cities adopted both master license agreements as well as design guidelines. And those actions were taken respectively in May and June of 2020. Upon receiving this information or seeing this, Oxnard staff notified the carriers in March of this year, the start of this month, of our intent to follow best practices and incorporate design standards modeled after various jurisdictions, with the idea that the city design standards would be tailored to fit Oxnard's needs. City staff has shared the design standards with our carriers, and we received positive feedback from both AT&T and T-Mobile. Both carriers have specifically communicated with us that they don't see any major issues with these, either legal or planning, with the master license agreement as well as the design standards. Specifically from T-Mobile, we heard from Tyler Gentry, who said, I don't have any major issues with the design standards, but I do have a few notes and one question. And from AT&T's rep, Corey Autry, we heard, I have great news in that AT&T doesn't see any red flags with the design guidelines. We have also heard from Verizon representatives who have requested that staff host a working group to consider edits to the design standards. So with that in mind, staff wanted to suggest maybe as part of this process that we hold one additional stakeholder meeting with the carriers specific to the design standards prior to taking this item to the full city council if the concept is essentially blessed by the committee tonight. So with that, staff just wanted to provide those comments to all of you tonight. And of course, we're here for questions. Not only am I here tonight, but we're joined by my new director, Vito Adamitis, as well as Isidro Figueroa, our principal planner, in case the committee has any questions for us as a whole. And with that, I yield the microphone.
Does committee have any questions of Mr. Klowitz?
So we have three speakers, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to get a couple of technical questions answered first.
Okay.
You mentioned, I believe the two cities were Fremont and Salinas.
That's correct.
Are Fremont and Salinas considered flat like Oxnard? Does it make a difference?
For purposes of this, I don't know if that would make a big difference because these facilities essentially would be on infrastructure along the public right-of-way, such as streetlights are the primary one, as well as maybe utility poles. And those would be along the public right-of-way, generally speaking. So while there might be topography in the different communities, ultimately it's going to follow the topography of the right-of-way.
Thank you very much. And one last, before we open the public again, Verizon, one of the carriers wants edits to the design standards. I only asked this questions after I watched a painful planning commission meeting about moving something on a pole. Is that what we're talking about, edits to design standards? Because it seemed extremely tedious. It took up a lot of time. The planning commission, some of them seemed to know and some of them didn't. And is that what design standards are?
Design standards effectively are going to identify where we can put equipment, what it's to look like, what width that equipment is to be relative to poles, what colors, those type of things, where the wires are going to go. And the thought process here is to avoid those painful conversations by getting agreed upon design standards established at the start of the process, meaning now, So we can go ahead and facilitate future application of process future wireless applications in as streamlined a process as possible. Due to federal law and state law, we have to move these applications through within either a 60 or 90-day period. And by everyone being on the same page to begin with, even before an application is submitted to us, it allows us to effectively avoid those conversations.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last one, I did see the price for each of these individuals for the communication on a facility. Do any of the carriers charge less than the others or pay more than the others? Is it a flat fee across the carriers?
So the fee that's included, the $270 per antenna location per pole per year, is a set fee set by the federal government. So that would be applied uniformly. The only way for us to potentially change that fee would be to go through a fee study. But the 270 is the safe harbor rate that the FCC has provided to us. Okay,
because in this day and age, $270, you get a nice hotel for a night. That's not much. The city's not getting, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mr. Scott. Mr. Kolowitz, thank you. The first speaker that we have is Mr. Royce.
Mr. Chair, one quick question before I was going to ask Scott, have we had any concerns from other carriers about using their poles for this items?
Not explicitly. Yeah. So the whole idea here is that we're establishing the guidelines for how we would move forward. The small cell antennas are small enough that they can be spaced on various utilities throughout the city. So there hasn't been an issue that we've come across with processing these so far in terms of spacing them out. So there's not a whole lot of sorry, the word is escaping me this evening, co-location for these type of facilities.
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, because they're smaller, is that it? Because they're smaller units? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Lopez, do you have any question of Mr. Kolowitz? No, okay. We have public speaker, Mr. Rose, please.
Diana Rojas.
I was kind of hoping there when you said Mr. Rose, I wasn't sure if that was me or not because Rojas is kind of close to that. So if you mean Diana Rojas,
that's what I mean. That's what I mean, ma'am.
Yes, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I know I have 3 minutes, so I will be brief. I listened to your questions. The master lease agreement draft, that's the final draft as presented. Verizon has two main concerns that I'd like to point out tonight. The first being the change of law language as written in section 14.6. Basically, Verizon's concern here, the language as written, basically states that if there's a change of law, whether it's with the actual federal communications order from 2018, providing the safe harbor rates for attachments, like Scott just discussed, the 270, or whether there's any other federal or state law change, the attachment rate for existing installations will remain the same. So the problem with that is that you, the city, will have an attachment rate that does not comply with existing state and or federal law. We had brought this to the attention of the city attorney as well as Scott and team and the other staffers that were previously with the city who have all since left during the last stakeholder meeting in July of 2020. And we are respectfully requesting that this language in the draft as written be modified so that any change in law, whether federal or state, will affect attachment rates for existing installations so they will be in compliance with existing law. The second point relates to the annual fee adjustment in section 3.1 subsection B of the agreement. Again, this issue Verizon raised during the stakeholder meeting and to previous staff of Oxnard who have all since left. We were recently contacted by Isidro March of, I think it was the 15th of this month, and I raised this issue also. The issue is with the annual fee adjustment, the language as written doesn't provide what that annual increase will be. Typically, with many jurisdictions, you see that there is a fixed percentage increase or perhaps a increase based on CPI. The language as written states that it will be based, quote, cost-based pursuant to the FCC 2018 order. What we had asked is an opportunity to review any type of study or cost study beforehand so that we have an opportunity to ascertain that the costs are reasonable and objective costs incurred by the city. This request was struck down and the language remained as is. So these are the two issues in the current master lease agreement draft that we would strongly urge this committee to take a second look at to make sure that the draft that's going to be presented forward to City Council is in fact with existing language in the current FCC order and reflect any changes to state and or federal law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kim Pong. Last name Kim Pong.
Miss Daisy Kim Pang. Daisy, you may unmute by pressing *6.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of the Public Works and Transportation Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you today. My name is Daisy Weekenpang on behalf of Verizon. Verizon appreciates the city's efforts to update its existing permit process and adopt new design standards for small cell facilities on municipal facilities. Verizon also appreciates the staff reaching out today to initiate discussions with Verizon on the same. I'm here to urge the committee to defer making a recommendation of adoption of the site permit process and design standards to City Council, to direct staff to convene an industry stakeholder meeting and or direct staff to hold working sessions with individual industry stakeholders on the details of the site permit process and design standards. And I believe from hearing Mr. Kolwitz earlier, he does recommend that we do have at least one industry stakeholder meeting, so we appreciate that. Verizon believes that it would be of much value to the city and all industry stakeholders for us to virtually sit down and discuss the details of the proposed site permit process and design standards before it is recommended for adoption to City Council. As it currently reads, for example, various design standard provisions state requirements to conform to standards like, quote unquote, minimize adverse visual impacts, or another quote is must not cause severe negative visual impact. These requirements are subjective in nature and are not consistent with the FCC's 2018 small cells order. Among other topics, the FCC addressed aesthetic criteria, requiring it to be reasonable, no more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments, and objective and published in advance. Reasonable standards are technically feasible and are meant to avoid out-of-character deployments. Objective standards must incorporate clearly defined and ascertainable standards applied in a principal matter. Additionally, there are various requirements that appear out of order in the process of building small cells in the public right-of-way, are either unnecessary, excessive, or duplicative, and or technically infeasible. As such, there are also requirements that are inapplicable or not feasible for wood pole small cell installations. Accordingly, we are requesting the committee and urging them to defer making a recommendation of adoption of these permit process and design standards and work with the industry in either an individual stakeholder working session or an industry stakeholder meeting so that we can work on the details outside of in front of City Council or this committee. We look forward to working with staff in more detail and collaborate about the various items on the site permit process and design standards that are of concern. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing your views. The next speaker is Ms. Pat Brown.
Ms. Pat Brown, You may unmute by pressing *6.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am. You have 3 minutes to speak.
I have an odd situation. I can see both sides. Really, seriously, I can see both sides. Where I am located, for some reason, I can be talking on the phone and the phone hangs up on its own. And this happens over and over and over again. And I thought it was just one of the phones in my house. And no, it's all the parts in my house. I have 3 phones, and it happens with all of them. Of course, they're all on the same phone line, but it happens on all of them. And I went to the AT&T a few years ago, probably longer than a few years, but time passes by so fast. They a little modem put in my windowsill that would be plugged, that would be plugged into my main telephone, hoping that the reception would be a lot better and that was the problem. And so for that reason, I want because my phones aren't actually plugged. None of my phones are actually plugged into the actual telephone wire that came up into the house. Mine are just plugged into a power outlet. And the modem, the little modem sits in a windowsill, and I would like to have better reception. So that means that I would like to have more of these big monstrosities that they call looking like they're eucalyptus trees. They don't look anything like eucalyptus trees because they're right next to eucalyptus trees out on Woolly Road. You see them, and you see the eucalyptus trees. They don't look anything alike. Absolutely nothing. I mean, if you've got only one eye and you just have partial sight in it, you can tell that there's just nothing. They're no way are they like eucalyptus trees. They are terribly, terribly ugly, and I don't want the cost to go up, but I would rather have better reception. So I'm going to switch my little modem to another window on the other side of the house. Instead of on the north side of the house, I'm going to switch it to one on the south side of the house, towards Woolly, in the direction of Woolly Road, hoping that I will get better reception there than I'm getting on the north side of the house. So I've got a problem. And either way you slice it, I'm not getting what I need, and if I got what I needed, it's going to look terribly, terribly ugly, and a lot of people are going to be seeing these what they call eucalyptus, and everybody's going to be unhappy about it because they are so terribly, terribly ugly. There's got to be another way to design it so that it's not so ugly. And I don't know about the power, what that's going to cost me. I don't know. And I know that AT&T is no longer offering this little contraption like I have. I know that they're not offering it anymore. So I don't really have too much of a choice. So whichever way you go, I'm going to there's going to be a negative for me. But I understand what the situation is.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Brown. I'd like to thank the 3 speakers, Rojas, Kimprong, and Brown, for their comments and sharing their views with us. Does our city manager have anything he wants to add on this matter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there were multiple issues raised, the attachment rates, what the annual increase, how that is set, stakeholder meetings and design standards, and of course, Ms. Brown's ultimate complaint about the aesthetic aspects. I'm going to have Mr. Kolwitz address all of those things, but I'd like to address the first item with regard to the attachment rates. And I think it's interesting that our representatives from, I believe it's Verizon, are so confident that future legislation will decrease the rates. So that's very telling. I'm also not convinced that any future federal legislation can force us to decrease any existing fee structures that we have. So I just want to point that out. And then after that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Kolwitz.
Alex, thank you very much for passing the baton here. I think you summarized the fee structure comments well, so I'm not going to engage on those anymore. If the council committee has any additional questions, ultimately the city attorney's office, I'm going to ask to help out with additional questions. In terms of aesthetic items that have been raised, the city staff, we're committed to working with our industry providers to make sure that we have design standards that work for all of us, is the bottom line. The MLA and the design guidelines, if they're done well, it's a win for everyone when it comes right down to it, is our perspective. And thinking about the comments that Ms. Brown provided to the committee, there are maybe 3 different pods of wireless facilities that we can talk about. The first type would be the macro facilities. And those are the really big towers that we see in the community. Sometimes they're unadorned towers and literally just infrastructure, industrial infrastructure. Sometimes they're disguised to look like faux trees. Sometimes they're disguised very well as parts of the building and you don't actually recognize they're out there. There are different versions that are done successfully or not. All those things said, those aren't the type of facilities that we're talking about today. The type of facilities that we're talking about today are the ones that I would say are in the second pod, which are the small cell facilities. These are already located throughout the entire community. In many ways, if they're done well, they disappear from the eyes because they're essentially seen as an extension of existing utility poles that are out in the community. Some are done better than others. And our intent is to try to give a uniform look to these to make it part of the infrastructure and just make them disappear as much as possible. Because they are smaller, that we have a better success rate with making them disappear. The trade-off for smaller facilities is you have more of them. The trade-off for the industry is the macro cells, which are the big ones that Ms. Brown was referring to. While they have a very big stature and they give out a very wide range of signal, they don't get into the nooks of crannies that are needed for today's technologies. All of our smartphones that utilize GPS service, they really need these smart cells to get us around everywhere. So the small cells are what we're focusing on. And as we see the industry continue to develop, we're likely to see more and more of those as time goes on. The final pod of wireless facilities that Ms. Brown was talking about was a personal device that we're not talking about relating whatsoever. Effectively, it was a modem or some sort of booster that individuals can have in their own homes. We don't have any regulations. The industry would not be proposing those. It would simply be something you can purchase as a private citizen, the same way that you can purchase a rotary phone or a wireless phone for your own house. That's different than a wireless communication device. The same way you can purchase a television. It's your own personal issue, and we're not looking to regulate those one way or another. So I'm available for additional questions if there's follow-up items, but I just wanted to provide those brief comments.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klowitz. Mr. Early, do you have anything you want to weigh in on this matter?
Nothing specific at this time. It's you don't have an action before you. The staff is just looking for the committee's input on the proposal and any thoughts or concerns that the committee might have.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mayor, go ahead.
I think one of the Verizon representative mentioned that that at this time that we kind of defer submitting this to the total city council so that the stakeholders can meet and work out a lot of the concerns that they might have. And I'm not sure what staff's recommendation would be on that, if I heard it correctly.
And Mr.
City
Chair,
Manager?
Yeah, and if I can add, because I had the same question, if there will be an additional stakeholder meeting, does that mean that it will come back to the Public Works Committee for another review before it goes to council?
Exactly right. That's
Yes.
Well, I would like to finish it up here. The third member here. I did hear a comment. They did not want to have the discussion in front of council. Is there a
That's right.
specific reason why? Because we're 3 council members here. I mean, I'd like to hear the discussion. I'm a representative of the city, not the phone company.
I'm assuming that they're looking at probably working out some of the concerns they might have before it comes back for recommendation. I'm not sure. But
Well, I can understand that, Mayor, but this is my concern. When we have 2 other carriers that don't have a problem, and now we got one that does have a problem, but they want to meet separately. I didn't hear them say they wanted to invite the other 2. I look at it all or none. I could be wrong and I could get outvoted here, but I want to treat everybody the same. What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
is that your understanding, Scott?
Yeah, so let me hop in here first. First and foremost, what I would say is all the carriers that we're talking to all agree that the MLA is a good concept, and the design guidelines as a tool are a good thing for us to collectively have. So with that statement, staff's recommendation actually would be looking for a committee to bless the idea and concept, direct staff to continue working with the carriers, plural, to make sure that we're reaching something that staff feels is appropriate for all carriers provided, and that we effectively report back to full council. And we're making that recommendation to keep this moving along, because we think at the end of the day, having these standards in place is to everyone's collective benefit.
And Mr. Chair, and I think that's basically what that when young lady was talking about, is to continue working with staff and potentially the other carriers too.
Well, Mayor, can you answer this question? Is it then going to come back to the committee? Because we had another council member ask that question. We haven't heard. Do you know?
I think it should come back to the committee. That would be, again, that would be my recommendation, is to come back to committee. Yeah. Yes.
Because I have a question, Mr. Kolowitz. We have a 2-part recommendation here. If we approve the first part, can the second part work out the details? Or you want to take both of them together? It would, and I'm taking your advice, or the city manager, or I see the assistant city manager there also.
Mr. Chair, if I can just chime in, I think good practice would be if we can continue working with the stakeholders, and if there are no significant changes, I would be comfortable forwarding it to the full council. However, if there are significant changes that arise out of the next round of meetings, then it should come back to this committee, because that's not then it wouldn't be substantively what this committee is reviewing tonight.
Good point.
Well, okay, the chair is going to ask this question. Substantive changes. Give me an example. They wanted the wording, the actual wording. I believe her name is Diana Rojas. Wanted the wording changed. Is that going to be a substantive change? Sounds like it would be. Can the attorney weigh in on that? I mean, is it or isn't it?
I can weigh in on that. It depends on what happens in the next round of meetings between staff and the stakeholders. And if staff agrees to any substantive changes, then it should come back to this committee. If it ends up that there's nothing different from what was presented tonight, then I would be comfortable moving forward to the full council, because it would mean that you've already reviewed it. So we don't know yet if there would be substantive changes, but if there are, it should come back to the committee.
Okay. How does the committee feel?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
I believe that the city manager made a good statement, that if there's any changes, substantive changes, it should come back to us. But if not, if we've already heard it, and if it looks okay, then we continue on with to the full city council.
sounds reasonable to me. How do you feel, Madam Chair, Councilmember Lopez?
Thank you, Mr. Perello. I'm fine with that, and I wanted to add, because I see you aren't too comfortable. You're concerned with that, and I completely agree with that, with the concerns and what substantive changes would come about. I would say, you know, if it would be helpful to you, that if you think that if there are no significant changes that go through the process, and it comes to council and they stand out to you, I mean, we could always at that point ask that it be sent back to the committee. Would that be possible, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, that is the council's prerogative.
I don't see why not. That's a good point.
So would that be okay with you, Mr. Chair?
Yeah. No disrespect to Verizon or any other carrier. I don't want my city of Oxnard to find out that they're getting the short end of the stick. I want my city of Oxnard, for too long in deals like this, they have found out that neighbor cities have gotten better deals. And then they grind their teeth and complain. I want us to get as good, if we can't get better, as good as any neighbor got.
And Mr. Chair, I agree with you too. And if it's not to our liking when it comes to either back to the committee or to the city council, we can always send it back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, would one of you like to make a recommendation like that?
So move.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Chair
And-
Perello,
Yes, and may I ask a question? The staff understands what we're requesting here, City Manager?
I do, but I'll let the staff answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I'll
I
chime
see
in here, yes.
smiles. Okay, thank you.
Staff understands.
Councilman Peralta votes yes.
Mayor Zaragoza,
Yes.
Councilmember Lopez.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Colwitz.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to the speakers for the presentation. The next item is items for future agendas. Do we have any suggestions for items for future agendas?
No.
I would like to bring this up. Maybe this might not be the appropriate place, but today's newspaper had a story about the city of Ventura and their commitment to do away with recyclable, non-recyclable styrofoam plastic containers, food containers. And it just struck me that there are 3 cities in this county that have coastal land, and we often hear the residents correctly complaining about the stuff that gets into the Ormond Lagoon and the stuff that gets into the ocean. And I would like our city not to be the last one that would jump on this bandwagon to consider banning certain types of non-disposable. They break into smaller parts, they end up polluting the ocean. Just something to look at. I think that Ventura deserves credit. Turns out Ventura is following in the footsteps of Thousand Oaks, which was following in the footsteps of Ojai. And I think that our city deserves as equal quality of life as the residents in Thousand Oaks, Ojai, or Ventura. That's why I bring it up. Those are my, any other items for future presentation? Nope. Hearing that, Madam Clerk, I'd make a motion for adjournment. Do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Chair Perello,
Yes.
Councilmember Lopez,
Yes.
Mayor Zaragoza.
Yes.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you very much. Have a good night. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.